Lord, we pray that you would help us to be able to grieve with those who grieve, to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. Help us to be people who are caring and loving. And Lord, please help us as we think about how the gospel might help us encourage and help our youth. Lord, we do thank you for this chance tonight to think through these topics and think through these things, and we think particularly of the youth that are under our care. Amen. About halfway through tonight, we'll break for some coffee and cake out in the foyer. That's a great opportunity for us to be able to talk to each other and get to know each other a bit better and compare great things that we're doing and learn from one another. But why don't I invite up our speakers and Hayden, who's facilitating us all. Sit down and grab a mic, and I'll just interview you briefly, and then I'm going to hand over. This is Hayden. He's at Prov City. He will be running the panel discussion for us, is what I'm trying to say. Yep. But thank you, that's Hayden. Okay, Greg, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Is that on? Yep.
I've got another question for you, but I'll let you do that.
Okay. So you can hear me okay? So my name's Greg Chain. I'm a clinical psychologist. I currently work in private practice across a couple of clinics in Darlington and Guildford. But previously a lot of experience in the hospital system, so like state major trauma units, Royal Perth, Sir Charles Gardner inpatient psychiatric unit, and community mental health.
Great, thank you. Britt, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, my name is Brittany. I'm a social worker and I currently work at a service called YouthLink. It's through their health department. So essentially we see young people 13 to 24 with like complex trauma presentations plus marginalisation in some way. And before that, I worked at Charlie's for a little bit, worked in Headspace, worked in their school support program, where else? Local government with young people. I was a school chaplain at the very start of my career. So lots of different places, but I guess I've always worked with young people.
Yeah. Man, I'm unprepared for that one. I did, really? Never. Was it? Damn. Life as a teenager for me. I'll try to be concise. Maybe I'll ramble on. What was it? It was, kind of angsty. Kind of, you're not. Obviously like social groups, I think you're trying to find your place, you're trying to navigate romantic feelings towards people, a lot of uncertainty there. I guess there's the pressures of, for me, there was the pressures of, achievement, and so I was playing tennis very seriously and then also trying to juggle school, and I think, there was a lot of pressure, and for me, there was that aspect of, I guess, even sort of checking out or trying to, not try too hard because, there was so much pressure. But, that's probably the main things I can think about being a teenager. Yeah.
I just remember it being super awkward and, angsty is a really good word for being a teenager. I, had inadvertently fallen into a friendship group of kids that all came from Christian homes, and I didn't realise that, and then became a Christian when I was about 16. So I feel quite thankful for the peer group I ended up in, because it was a total mistake, but it was great. And we were all pretty dorky, and that was fun.
Okay, well, thank you
sitting down. Yeah. Oh, is that okay, everyone? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I'm used to sitting down in my job, so I feel like it feels like home. I'll try to keep it fairly brief because I want to allow time for panel discussion. But yeah, I guess thinking through the Bible and mental health, I'll probably talk about two things. The first would be the idea of diagnosis, and then the second thing I might talk about is attunement. So the first thing, diagnosis. I'll start with a story. So when I was working in community mental health, I still remember talking to this young woman and her teenager, and we'll call her Lisa. And we were having this discussion. Lisa comes in and she's like, "Greg, like I think I got ADHD, or maybe it's OCD, or someone's told me I've got an emerging personality disorder," and I don't know if anyone's got much, experience in the mental health system, but sometimes clinicians can be a little bit like throwing darts at a dartboard in terms of diagnosis in mental health. So. And this is what I said to Lisa. I almost said her real name, but I'm glad I didn't. I said, "Lisa, and it was on the fly, so I don't know how good the metaphor is. You can tell me." I said, "Lisa, like, say we're in a town and the town was flooding, and we wanted to determine how many millimetres it would take for us to categorise it as a flood. Do you think that's more important, or do you think it's more important to figure out why the town is flooding?" And I was trying to tell Lisa that it's not so much as important to get a label as it is to actually understand why the thing is happening. And so I guess I say that because I think we're living in a culture where there's an implicit idea that if you can get the right diagnosis, that will solve the problem. And if I jump to the Bible in terms of diagnosis, I guess when I look at Jesus and the way that he diagnosed issues, he didn't diagnose mental health disorders. He was able to, because he was God, is God, he was able to understand a human being so well that he could just nail the thing that they needed to hear. So one example is, his encounter with the rich young ruler. Rich young ruler comes to Jesus and asks him, what he needs to do, I think to inherit eternal life. And Jesus identifies the thing that he needed to address, and it was to sell everything that he had. And so Jesus understood this man well, that his riches and his status were so important to him that it was getting in the way of him living a full life. And then you get another instance where, Jesus, is touched, his robe is touched when he's walking through the crowd, and he turns to, the person that touched him, so who touched me? And, the woman identifies herself, a woman who had been suffering, unsolvable bleeding for many, many years, and she would have been considered to be unclean in that culture. And he doesn't, do what she thinks he's going to do and, be upset that she touched him. But in that moment, he understands that she needs to feel like that she's not unclean with him. And so I guess the thing that I'm sort of touching on there is tonight I'll probably be, pushing for the idea that we've got to be really careful to just label things as mental health diagnoses, particularly in the church, because I have been seeing a bit of a trend of, delegating responsibility to secular institutions, and perhaps not having the faith in the power of the gospel. Not that it will solve everything, because we live in a broken world, but just not being too quick to delegate. I guess the second thing that I'd say is I think that an important concept for us helping teenagers is the idea of attunement. So I think that Jesus was incredibly good at understanding a human being so well that he knew exactly what they needed to hear. And I think that's incredibly important for working with teenagers. From a psychological theory perspective, attachment theory has been like a really important influence in psychology in more modern decades. And the idea of attunement and attachment theory is that from very early, it's really important for a parent, and right at the start, the mother, to be attuned to their child. And so what that does is, so like an example of that is, if a baby's crying, a mother might be something along the lines of this. I'm not a mother, but, I'll give it a crack. But, you're so upset, aren't you? Like, you poor thing. And it helps the child to feel like that there is a presence with them, holding them in their distress, and a connection forms, and it actually creates a really strong foundation for that human being to step into life with a good foundation. And so taking that principle, it's really important when we're working with young people and adults, but particularly teenagers, that we take the time to attune to them. We don't come with preconceived ideas about what they might necessarily need or a diagnosis, but we take the time to understand them and attune to them, so that they'll trust us and perhaps open up to us, and that we can walk alongside them for potentially healing if they are struggling with some sort of brokenness. So that's it's my little take on I guess the Bible, mental health, and how we can integrate psychological understanding without stripping, I guess, the gospel and the hope that we have in Jesus of its power.
Cool. I have some slides. I'm actually going to grab my laptop so I can look at the notes there. I have to apologise to Hayden because this is the most poorly designed PowerPoint he's ever going to see in his life. And I was a little bit like, oh, how embarrassing for him to see me at my lowest point.
That looks great.
Yeah, when you copy and paste from websites. This helps me go along. Cool. So I will start by saying everything I'm going to talk about it's a theory. It's not like set in stone. It's somebody's idea that they've put together that underpins, I guess, the work that I have been doing with young people in terms of just thinking about, like, at each stage of life, what does a human being need? And Erikson has this idea around a conflict, like an inner conflict that might happen at that age. But really, for the purposes of what we're talking about, the main task of adolescence, so that 12 to 18, and there's lots of talk now about like adolescence is extending into the 20s. It probably is, who knows? Doesn't really matter though. Essentially, the task is identity. So we're working out who we are and where we fit in the world, and we're beginning to, in like a Western context, we are beginning to individuate from our family of origin and begin to work out who we want to be. I personally think this is really good news for the gospel because it is an identity changing and formation type experience. And so therefore, what better time in your life to really consider that than at that time when that is what your whole purpose is, essentially. So we want to, as an adolescent, we're beginning to increase independence, understand ourselves, our relationships, like Greg touched on in his memories, they do begin to develop romantically. Peers become more important. Emotional regulation begins to improve, but that obviously continues into our 20s as well. And there's lots of risk-taking, taking on different identities. We can see that with this whole idea, if you've ever heard of it in self-harm and suicide, there's this idea of contagion, which has been studied a lot in the research. But essentially, it actually makes sense for the developmental stage of young people because they're trying on different identities. They're trying to work out who they are, and there can be a bit of this kind of pack mentality that forms, which is why young people are really influenced by their peers. And again, youth groups are really important because they provide a safe place with peers for young people. And that's really vital. The next one, this is Piaget's theory of cognitive development. The whole point of showing you this is, I got to do it on here, not on my computer, is really that from 12 onwards, we're beginning to think in a more future-focused way. We're beginning to consider what our life is going to look like and who we're going to be in that. And really for us, the point of this is to consider when you're working with the young people you're meeting with, whether they've got distress or they don't have distress or they have a mental health illness or whatever might be going on, we're thinking about where are they at in their life and where are we meeting them and how can we support them in that. This one is from a research paper, which is why it's so wordy. But again, the point of this is really to show you what's happening at a cognitive level, what's at a psychosocial level, what's happening with the caregiver, that idea that the caregiver is starting to be less important, the family is just less important, the peers are more important. This is actually looking at trauma symptoms, but I think this next one's probably a little bit better, just in terms of thinking about what is actually normal development. And I think it's worthwhile for youth groups to think about what they can say from the Bible into each of these areas. The Bible has so much to say about identity. And I don't know, I was kind of reflecting on my way here, probably the time of my life that I had the most amount of time to consider my identity would have been in my teens and 20s. And now in my 30s, I have 3 small children and I do not have time to think about my identity or who I am or even what I'm going to eat. And I am relying on the input I received in my teens and 20s for who I see myself as now and where I place myself in the world and how I behave. And I'm stuffing up all the time, but the gospel is what I keep coming back to. And that is in sorrow and that is in joy and all the different parts of life that we all experience, because that is the human experience. But when we look on the other side of those adjustment difficulties, I guess that can give us a bit of an idea of how would we know something might actually be kind of off, what's part of the normal experience and just that what we would expect of young people today, and what might give you a bit of an indication that something else is going on. Because, difficulties in our... Sorry, I just found my phone. I was going to read Psalm 139. Difficulties in our mental health are a normal part of the human experience because things are hard sometimes. They don't indicate a mental health disorder, but they might indicate that someone needs extra support. So I'll read you Psalm 139 just to finish, which again gives us a sense of our identity in Christ. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was nothing of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they were more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I think the Psalms particularly, but all through the Bible, we get a picture of people in distress, stuffing up, getting it wrong, finding things difficult, and God being with them in that. Adolescence is a real time of turmoil. It's really hard. We all remember how awkward it was. And there are lots of pressures on young people today that maybe we didn't face ourselves, but there's always been pressures on young people regardless because of that stage of life. And I think we can really take comfort in our role in supporting that and working with that because it's vital and really important.
Great, thanks guys. Can we give them a round of applause? So that was an intro to kind of some thought starters to get us into the idea, the topic, and what I want you to do now while we just get ready is chat to the person next to you and what is a question that you have or still have about youth and mental health, and just chat amongst yourselves. There is a way to ask you questions if you want to put them in there, or I can ask from the floor as we go.
Just like run around the back and just go like, hey, I got a question. yeah. I did that set up the audience at college panel of rape just this hour, and then and I like rushed over and I just like clicked on the email sort of like copied and pasted it. And it sent it to Connor instead of Connor's voice. Like it just defaulted to the wrong.
All right, I'm going to bring you guys back in. Again, if you've got questions, feel free to send them through on Slido, and I should get them coming through. And but to start off, I'll ask a question. I've got a question for each of you. Greg, you were talking about label seeking and how that can be a bit of a thing, and I think that definitely is a thing. Do you have any insights into why that is a thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few reasons. Off the top of my head, there's two common ones, and again, it's not an exhaustive list. And Britt, help me out if I miss things. I guess one is I think sometimes there's an adolescent or an adult, but an adolescent might feel like if I can get a diagnosis that says that I am, I guess, ill, it can remove responsibility, either because they don't want to take responsibility for actions, or they've actually been blamed a lot, perhaps by a parent, for things that isn't their actual responsibility. So an example of, Lisa I mentioned at the start, hope you still remember her, and my amazing flood metaphor. Was it amazing? Or?
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. Lisa, when we met with her family, after the meeting, every clinician looked at each other in the room and commented on the mother. She was just like classically narcissistic, and so this poor girl, she just and really pretty popular word at the moment, gaslit. She would just constantly be gaslit. So like everything was her fault, and if she ever tried to get her mother to like acknowledge any fault or like apologize. Just never got it. And so a diagnosis was really important for her because it validated her pain. And I guess like the thing that I tried to help Lisa to do was not to find a counterfeit diagnosis of the problem, but to understand that, like of course you're going to be wrong at times, and you know, I obviously have a theological understanding of sin and that we're all sinful. But there are certain people who they actually take too much responsibility for things. And so Lisa was in a position where she would blame herself for everything, and she wanted relief through a diagnosis. And then the second one is, and it's a bit more of a simple one, I think there's just the hope that it will have explanatory power, that if you're able to label something clearly from a medical perspective, and in our secular world, I won't go down the rabbit hole of the imminent frame and the fact that, but anyway, sorry. The fact that we live in a very secular world that honours a medical view of brokenness over a spiritual one, there's a hope, almost a gospel, that if we can identify a medical problem, then there will be a medical solution. So they're probably like two of the things that come to mind.
I think also some of it could be around trying to gain acceptance into a subculture and have an identity, like find a way to fit somewhere. I think that goes across a lot of things, but a lot of the clients I have seen over the years, particularly where they've got very complex trauma presentations and perhaps incredibly painful childhoods, but where parents have been absent rather than overtly abusive, they often seek certain diagnoses, perhaps more like an ADHD, which is obviously legitimate in some circumstances, but that validates their experience without having to acknowledge the pain of what has been absent in their life. But that's kind of specific. But some people I find love a diagnosis and some people really hate it and don't want them, and I kind of feel like it's not always that important, but yeah.
So if I put my youth leader hat on, it's not uncommon to get youth who might present you with something like, I've got this, or I'm really struggling with anxiety or something. And sometimes you're like, probably true. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if that's true. How do we, Greg, you were saying that we have to be careful not to over-diagnose or over-delegate things out. How do we actually know? Like, what should we do in a situation like that? How can we still love them and not, you don't want to underreact, but you also don't want to overreact? It seems like a hard spot for us to be in.
Yeah, for me, it's my philosophical perspective, and you know, I don't know if everyone will agree with me, but I guess for me, I don't think you need a diagnosis to be cared for. So it's not like and I think it is almost like a belief in some people, maybe because of like a family of origin issues and maybe like invalidating parents. But like, 100%, I don't think we should model that. Oh, you've reached the threshold. You've met criteria. Now you get cared for. I think that's, I guess, what I'm saying. Like the overreaction thing. It's like, well, I kind of think it shouldn't even be a question. It should just be like, like we sincerely care for everyone, and we take everyone's experiences very serious, and their suffering as serious. And in terms of how to help, it's kind of like, I'm just trying to think of like, a teenager off the top of my head that I've seen recently. But like, one of them, it's like, this private school boy, how old was he when I first saw him? I think he was 16, year 11. So mum comes in the first session, and straight away it's on. Greg, I want you to see my son together with me, right? And I'm like, look, that's not how I do things. I do like to get parent and child together at times, but I probably wanted to see him individually. And she kept pushing, and she was an incredibly powerful personality, right? And you know, and this is hard for me because I like to be gentle, I think. But you know, I had to say to this woman, right? I look her in the eye and I say, hey, look, you know, this is the way I do it. And if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. And you know, and the reason I tell you that little story is, you know, how do I help that young man? Well, nobody stands up to mum. And so by doing that in that moment, I'm not being like, you know, particularly rude. It's my room, you know, she's coming to me for a service. I'm telling her what I do. But by standing up to her in a contained way, he gets a little bit of hope in the universe that someone can stand up to mum. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like you can address issues without having to formalise, diagnosis.
I think also that you could just ask them how it affects them. Like if they're telling you they're anxious, like what does that even mean? Because there has been, like it's great that mental health is people are more aware of mental health in the community, but it does mean that it gets used in a more colloquial way. Like so people will be like, oh, I'm so OCD. When actually, if you were really suffering with OCD, like it's quite debilitating. So if someone's saying they're anxious, like what do they mean by anxious? Are they just a bit nervous? Because that's a great opportunity to be like, it's actually really normal. Like anxiety is really useful to get you to do things. It's when it becomes like actually crippling you from doing anything that it's problematic. So really just starting with where they're at and what they might need. But I couldn't echo more like what Greg's saying around like everyone deserves to be cared for in a really good way. But yeah, people do feel like they need something in order to get something sometimes.
Yeah, but what if they start leaning on it? Like, maybe they want to get out of things, or maybe they want to, I don't know, just using, like weaponizing it almost, which is not totally uncommon.
But part of the treatment for anxiety is exposure and like doing difficult things. So, you know, like I guess you could question if they're trying to get out of things all the time because they're like, I'm too anxious to do that. You could be like, could we do it together? Or like, have you thought about, you know, looking at that more? You know, like you don't have to lean into everything someone says to you.
I completely agree. You know, I'll just tell you stories because I think stories are good. You know, there was a mother that brought her son to see me once for school refusal issues, and look, I mean, you don't always win with school refusal, but this one was a win. And the boy was 12 years old. He was like an eccentric kid, very intelligent, and there was an issue where mum would get him to the bus. And again, this is echoing what Britt's talking about in regards to exposure to the things that make us anxious. She'd get him to the bus, and then he's got a tummy ache, and he's you know, feeling really distressed. And so then mum would always cave to the anxiety and you know, and take him home. And so I still remember this session with her, and it was like a really pivotal one. And you know, I'm talking to mum, and I said, oh look, I think that's the moment where you need to encourage him to get on the bus. And she looks at me in the eye, and it was hard. She goes, can you guarantee me that won't do him damage? It's like, and I said, well, I can't guarantee you, but I'll take the risk that you need to take, and I'll tell you that you absolutely should get him to get onto the bus. And hey, look, like I said, it doesn't always work, but it was a win. And yeah, like the kid ended up going to school and loving school. And mum comes in, I think, like, you know, 4 weeks later, and she's like, she thinks I'm a magician. But it's just like kind of what Britt was talking about, that, and I guess what you're saying about pandering to distress. Yeah, it's 100% not the best in the best interest of you know, the person most of the time. There has to be a loving and guided movement forward to conquer the things that you fear. So.
But then it can be hard because when we're at youth group, we only see them like 2 hours a week. And so all sorts of things go on in between that time, and often we might not even align like with what the parents like are saying. I don't know, do you guys have any insight into that? Like, How
Do
can
you have an example? Like, do you have an example? Sorry.
No, I guess it's like this problem comes up all the time in youth ministry. We've got these guys 2 hours a week. We're trying to really invest in their lives and see change, and it's slow. But yeah, maybe it's just maybe the answer is just we need to lower the burden off our own shoulders and be like, we're not here to fix all their problems. But yeah, we're not. Yeah, so we just need to own that.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you agree, Britt, but I think even as a clinician, like we have to like acknowledge that we are there to obviously inform, support, and guide. But I think it can be like if we have a pressure to fix everything, it can actually be. I think we can do like a worse job. And so I guess sometimes like patience and humility and knowing that we're not God, and and maybe them just rocking up for 2 hours for a long time. Perhaps work has been done that we just don't see.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I reckon, if you can just create this space of 2 hours a week where they can kind of leave lots of their anxieties and their troubles behind. That's amazing, right? There's a question here about what are good questions that we can ask teenagers to try and understand how they're feeling, to kind of without labeling them, without implying that there's something wrong with them. What are some good questions? Or maybe it's like, I've written a question down here as well about just what are some counselling basics? We don't think we're counsellors. We don't want to pretend like we are, but we also do find ourselves in situations, in conversations with youth who need help and guidance and prodding. How do we do that in a healthy way?
I've forgotten the first part of the question, but a bit about basic counselling. I think learning to listen well and give people space to talk, learning to validate, which just means to like verbally recognise their experience and saying, oh yeah, that would be hard. So resisting the temptation to say things like, at least it's not this, or oh, but last week this happened. Like it's a really very culturally normal for us to not validate people. I try really hard to do it, and even with my own children, like half the time I'm like, oh, come on, like, just put your shoes on. I don't care about how annoyed you are right now. I think validating and listening are two great skills that you can just practice, and they're really good skills within your own family anyway. Just to have, like, with your partner or with your children or with your friends, to be someone that listens well and validates and resists the temptation to always talk. What was the first part of the question?
It was, what questions can we ask to understand how they're feeling?
I think you could just ask open kind of questions like, how are you going? How's the week been? Anything good this week? Anything bad this week? Like, just quite open-ended, I would. Because that gives them the opportunity to give you as much as they want to. And some people take a really long time to feel comfortable to talk. Some people hold a lot of shame around their experiences, and they're not going to be ready to talk about them even in the time that they know you, or they can't make sense of them yet. Because if you remember back to being a teenager, it's kind of the first time you realise that other families don't operate the same way as your own. Like when you go to your friends' houses as a teenager, you're like, oh, your parents do that. Like, that's not what we do in my house. And you start to form a picture that, like, the world is not just the world that you've grown up in. So I think you've got to expect that there will be young people that are in actual difficult situations, and you might suspect that they are, but they don't even realise yet. And it's not always our place to, like, highlight that unless we think there's real imminent harm, in which case you probably should do something. But otherwise, you can give people the time and space.
I'd echo what Britt said. So like especially with the listening and I guess validating a person's feelings and experience. Something that I found like just super helpful when I was doing postgrad. I guess the concept of like reflective listening. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's basically where you just you paraphrase back the thing that the person's said to you. So it might be, and you just got to be careful because, like, I mean, I just hate like when it gets really contrived, but it might just be something along the lines of, them talking about something that's frustrating or they're angry, and it's just something along the lines of, oh man, that just sounds like so frustrating, and so that's that attunement thing that I was talking about, and I guess that's the validation and listening that Britt's talking about. So if you look up reflective listening, you'll kind of give a description on, just Google it. There's this really cool little video. I haven't seen it there for a long time, but it's Carl Rogers, and he was a person-centered therapist. I don't agree with all the principles of that, but there's a really good video where he counsels a woman. I think her name is Marie or Maria, I think. But if you look up Carl Rogers' interview, and it's just got this really good, kind of example of like reflective listening and that. And just the second thing, sorry if I'm ranting, the second thing is questions. I'm just thinking of like maybe, teenagers who might fit under that neurodiverse or autistic or ADHD umbrella. I often like try to just find the piece of myself in them as a bridge or a stepping stone to find out the things that they care about and things they're feeling. So like, for example, I really access like, my love of, certain animes at times. And, and it's just really cool when, like how shocked a teenager would be that I've watched the same show as them. and it's such a great in because you can, and I know it sounds like, am I allowed to say wanky? Anyway, wanky psychologist sort of thing. But it's like, it actually, a lot of the times the kind of like the content that a person's into, there's just these really beautiful metaphors there. So like even one example is like, this 14-year-old once was talking about, I asked, what do you like to do? And he's like, I like to play Minecraft. I was like, oh yeah, tell me about what you've been doing in Minecraft. I've never played Minecraft, but he was like telling me how like, he had this castle, and in the dungeon he had like these evil dictators that he was torturing. Right, and like straight away it's like ping, ping, ping. He has a real problem with authority and how they're incompetent and unjust, and so like you've got an in there. Do you know what I mean? So I guess like questions that aren't direct, but you just kind of get to understand like a kid's interest and that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard recently someone was telling me to validate the emotion, not the thing they said. So say it's like, I'm so ugly. Don't go, no, you're not. Or don't go, yes, you are. Just say, yeah.
That must be so
no,
hard.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. No, they said, just say, that must be really hard. That sounds really, yeah. And so validate the emotion, and then they feel heard, and you haven't. All right, next question. We'll get onto it after Kate, but there is quite a few questions about neurodiversity and things like that. So,
can I just comment? On that? I do think it's like a really important thing you said, by the way, because especially as Christians, like, so a humanistic view of the world and a human being would be that we're just really fantastic, and we need to get out of the way of that, right? And so I think that would lead to therapists, clinicians, being over-validating, everything, like then just never challenge the person, where because we obviously, I do anyway, have an orthodox or, I have a theological view that, we're all sinful, there'll be times that, a teenager will be doing the wrong thing. And I think it's a lack of integrity just to validate everything they're doing and just ally with them and side with them on everything they're doing. So I just wanted to affirm that, I think that's a really important thing.
Great. Last question before we have a break. How do we help youth when their parents are being emotionally abusive and confronting the parents is likely to cause the child more harm than help them?
That is incredibly tricky. A lot of the young people I've worked with have been at an age where, so a lot of the young people I work with are kind of more like 18, 19, 20, so they have a bit more autonomy and kind of can, I guess, get away from more toxic family environments. But I have worked with a lot of like 14, 15-year-old young people where they're stuck in that environment. It's not at a point where like child protection would do anything. And I work with lots of young people where we have very little contact with the parents anyway. So one of the phrases I use a lot is your parents are doing the best that they can, but they're not always able to meet your needs, because even when a young person has emotionally abusive parents, they'll often still feel loyal to them on some level, and it is painful to recognise that your parents are really doing the wrong thing, and it's probably more of an adult realisation in a lot of ways. And so you kind of have to hold both, that it needs to be clear to the young person that it's not okay, but you do need to not excuse the parents, but the comment they're doing the best they can, like that might actually be the best those parents can do. And both parts are true. But that's a really tricky situation, because there's such a sliding scale in that question of like, at what point would you do something further? And that would be something for me personally at work. Like I would be accessing supervision and talking with other professionals and using a professional judgment to make that call. Whereas when you're in the community, you're not in that professional role. You could try and bring the parents on side, but again, that might be difficult. I reckon it would be case by case. It's where I don't know if it exists in the city prov, but at Bayswater Prov, we have like a critical care team now. So for situations that are tricky within the church, there is a group of us that are known to all the church, like we've been announced as this critical care team, that will kind of give input, not as if we were the professional caregiver in that situation, because we're not, but we're able to kind of liaise with the pastor to give input on maybe what to do, and it's people from all different clinical and legal backgrounds that give input to that. So I think establishing things like that in churches is actually really helpful. I don't know if Greg ever gets asked questions like that in a church context, but it's such a big, it could mean so many things, emotional abuse, really.
Yeah, it's just really tough. I mean, Brit's probably a lot more experienced than me because I've mainly worked in adult settings in government, and then with private, the fact that the parent is bringing the child to therapy, they're probably not like hiding too much, or you know what I mean? Like it's not going to be often that setting. But there have been times where I guess I've acknowledged that. Yeah, I've acknowledged how hard it is to have to stay in that environment. And look, sometimes I don't know if this is good advice, but sometimes I've said, actually, I did say it to that young man, that private school boy. And by the way, she kept bringing him for the next year and a half, and he got better. But I did say, like, oh man, like, unfortunately, like, maybe when when it's time to leave home, like your relationship with your mother will improve, and you also have a lot more freedom. And I guess it's just trying to give like just a bit of a narrative of a bit of hope. Like, this isn't forever. Like, with pain and emotional and physical pain, actually. If there's a perception that it will never end, the pain is much greater. But if you know that there's an end point, then it makes it a bit more manageable. So, but that's, I don't know, it might be a bit of an impotent, solution.
Yeah, and I reckon if you're a youth leader here tonight and you have a question like that, if it comes to dealing with parents, your job is just to go up to your youth pastor, and they'll probably just handball it on. But there should be probably processes in place to do that, to kind of navigate that.
Can I just give sorry, I just thought of one last thing. Just really quickly, like, this is again like the kind of indirect stuff where like it actually even takes the pressure off, where you don't have to have exactly the right words. just by modelling something different with the child or the adolescent can give them some hope or a bit of like a North Star kind of experience. So, for example, if you know that the parent never lets them win, if you are with them in a way where sometimes you apologise if you got something wrong with them, or like I don't know, even if you're doing youth group and doing like a competitive process, like not competing with them or, like crushing them, making them feel big with you. Again, that can be like an intuitively healing thing. You don't actually have to be saying like, oh, I know your parents are abusive. And so that's just one last thing, like how you actually are with somebody, that implicitly I think can be a healing thing too.
And sometimes they just, the validation of like, oh, that must hurt, that must be really hard, is kind of all they want, right? Like it's just they just want to be seen and heard. And cool, we're going to wrap that up. One thing I will say before we finish and before we go into the next section is I realise that this isn't just an issue that youth deal with, but it's also an issue that many of us might struggle with. And so if we say anything tonight that is uncomfortable, or maybe you're dealing with yourself, don't ignore that. And we just want to recognise that and acknowledge that. And if it does bring anything up to you, go and find some people to talk about that with and get some help. All right, I will finish that up. Chris, do you want to come up and tell us what's happening next? And then we can come back up. Yeah, we're going to have another round of questions after this. So if we didn't get to your question, don't worry.
It's okay, I'll just stand here. So we're going to have tea and coffee. It's on the other side of this wall. And there's some cake there as well. If you're one of those special people for whom God has blessed you with being gluten-free or something, there's some special cake up here. For whom that has been blessed, so you can be blessed in a non-religious sense. The other thing I will say is if you still need to pay for tonight, then just come and see me. You can either pay through card, or else I can get an invoice sent to your church. So, and then your church can pay it if they're paying for this training. So, that's all. Come back here at about 8:30.
All right. I hope that you had some good discussion through the break. We're going to get straight back into it with your questions that you'd asked before. As we go, I've kind of collated a heap of them, so we'll see how far we get through them, and then if we get stuck, I'll check the thing again if you've sent any more. But I can't promise we'll get to all of your questions. I'm going to start with this one off the bat. How do we understand neurodivergent youth? And what does this mean? What does that mean, that term? And is there an overdiagnosis? Maybe just start with the first bit of that. How do we understand neurodivergent youth?
Do you want me to start? I just have to be careful not to be too controversial. I think I am a little bit. I guess maybe the controversial thing, maybe it's not. It's just sort of funny how like the umbrella is just getting like broader and broader and broader and broader, where it just feels like everyone's going to fit under some sort of umbrella at some point. So I do think that perhaps there's a bit of an overdiagnosis, because I just think that neurodiverse umbrella, it's just capturing so many people. Probably. Man, I don't want to exaggerate, but like I reckon every second client that comes in, thinks they have ADHD or autism, and but look, here's the way I like to conceptualize it. Like you just stay outside of the debate of it. I think it describes it's a type of person that it's. Thinks outside of the box, doesn't sort of fit convention. Sometimes there's even anger towards convention. I think that's the kind of that sort of explains the umbrella, because I seem to do really well with neurodiverse clients, and I think it's because I can actually relate to them on issues of eccentricity, talking about where conventions actually don't make sense. A lot of the times there's family of origin issues where, a parent's been, too tight with conventions or even too allowing. But, that's probably, why I see neurodivergence. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just describes essentially neurodivergent. The term is about describing a different way of looking at the world, and exactly the kind of themes you're talking about. I heard a stat of 1 in 5. I don't actually know, though, where that came from, so I don't know how helpful that is. It is more and more common at work. I think that for most of the young people I'm seeing, they've kind of fallen through the cracks and maybe didn't get noticed as a child, had really, really struggled, perhaps dropped out of school. So I guess by the time I meet them, looking into some sort of diagnosis around ADHD or autism actually helps make a lot of sense of their circumstances. But I'm not seeing really the regular population that Greg would be seeing or you might be meeting. So I don't know how much it affects in terms of it sounds like it's becoming more and more. There's a lot of TikTok stuff as well around it, like the you might have this and they point at the video or whatever.
Two things. And by the way, please call out questions if there's pushback or you think I'm misspeaking. Please do it. Just be gentle. But I think two of the things I was going to say now I've lost them because I'm scared that you're not going to be gentle. I think in terms of so one thing that I think is actually super important is part of the whole neurodivergent thing. There is that kind of concept of being overstimulated and overloaded. We're just getting saturated and flooded technologically. It's just too much. I think if you look at it at us from a theological perspective, we're limited creatures, and I just think we're getting a world just thrown at us constantly, and we're being barraged. And so I think that's probably another reason why there's just such a frequency of people saying that they're neurodiverse, because everyone's just feeling so flooded. Even we're watching a documentary recently on Netflix, and it was just about these blue zones where there's pockets where you've got the highest number of people living over 100. I don't know if anyone's seen that. But basically one of the comments was, in some of these places, there's less technology, it's a simpler life, and there was the comment that for a lot of communities and families, the biggest issue of the day is some cattle got stuck in a fence, and it's a solvable problem. It's done. Where we're getting flooded with just atrocities across the globe. We're sitting with all of that. I think it's just too much, and I feel flooded and overloaded. So that's one of my comments, I guess, about technology and neurodiversity as well. Yes.
From what I understand, I don't know as much about ADHD, but with autism, it's been studied for a number of years. It, excuse me, as the name suggests, though, in terms of that spectrum, that is part of what makes it difficult, I think, and probably makes it more widespread, is that there's a lot of things that kind of fit within it and a lot of presentations, and you used to have Asperger's, and now that's changed into now it's all autism spectrum disorder. And so when you had Asperger's, that would be more what people would consider your more highly functioning, generally actually incredibly intelligent people that are quite focused and get a lot done, and are some of our, they would be people that, lots of people that are quite famous for achieving a lot of things might have had Asperger's. That name got taken away because the clinician involved with that had done some really dodgy, awful things. And so that's why it got pulled into autism spectrum disorder. And so I don't know if that's part of what makes it feel broader, but I agree it is it is continuing. Does feel like the ADHD stuff, especially, feels like that comes up a lot. A lot of clients say that to me. They've got ADHD.
ADHD. Also, so Perth is ADHD capital of Australia. There's the most yeah.
Why is
So, is it? It's hard to say. Like, is it that we, as a population, are presenting more like that, or is it that the clinicians who diagnose, they're just like more quick on the trigger? It's just, look, I mean, I know this is like a big one, right, philosophically, but like it's actually the case with like all mental health disorders. Like at some point, in the timeline, people sat down at a table and decided, what constitutes a mental health disorder. And I promise this isn't conspiracy theory stuff. At a lot of those tables, there's been people with heavy links to pharmaceutical companies, and so what I know this is like, I promise I'm not like into QAnon and all that sort of stuff. I swear, right? Some of my friends are, but I'm not. No, but it's just like it's not like controversial. It's like we know that people are greedy, and we know that people want to make money. And so there is a vested interest at times in scientific inquiry, and also in terms of the way we conceptualize things. There's a vested interest if when you go to the GP, they get given by pharmaceutical companies at times a pamphlet. If you meet this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, it suggests recommending this mood stabilizer. And so again, I'm not trying to destabilize the whole of the mental health system, but I'm just saying we just have to be really careful not to just swallow I guess theories and
Yeah. I feel like Kate has an answer. Or a question. Mm. Mm. Yeah. I guess well, okay.
it's
Yeah.
I think it's also modeling that, though. Like, there's so much you learn from kind of absorbing being around people. So I think probably we all need to get off our phones more or talk more about what, like, the impact it has on us. I know last Christmas I had like 3 months off social media apps, and immediately within about a week I was like, oh, I'm really less anxious. And I don't have an anxiety disorder, but I was just at a level of anxiety from constantly being able to be connected or contacted, or even just that you've got to like be able to reply to people on several different platforms, rather than just like via text or through a phone call. So I think modelling it has a lot to do. Like, encouraging and modelling it in our own lives is probably more powerful than saying most things. But yeah, there is, like, when you talk about the videos getting shorter and stuff, there's lots of research showing that our attention span is shortening. And that obviously has terrible effects and would contribute to a rise in potential focus issues. The other part of ADHD, though, is like difficulties with emotional regulation. And I think also if you're dulling your emotions by going on your phone all the time, because that puts you in a state of not feeling, that would create potential emotional regulation issues too.
Maybe I'll channel that a bit more. Is there a way that we can talk to our youth about social media and their phones and that more in a more healthy way?
Should we answer that and then I think there's a question.
Oh, yeah.
So how is there a way we can
talk to our youth about using social media in a more healthy way?
I think you can just be honest about what is happening with social media. Like, we all know, and there's docos, what's that?
Yeah.
The Social Dilemma. I haven't actually watched it. I've heard it's really good though. Like, talking about it, giving information about it, challenging them if they're using it all the time, or even if they're not, empathizing with the temptation.
Yeah.
Like, there's, I don't know what else you can do.
Yeah,
Really.
I mean, look, I mean, I think this is probably where on a panel, again, it's so specific to each person as well. So I think it's probably finding out, what is important about being on that platform or, engaging in that way, and then trying, I guess, to address that through a non-counterfeit way. And then there's that other part where I'm going to sound like a loony conspiracist again, but it's not. Like, literally, they hire psychologists to design these platforms to addict us. Like, talking about neurochemistry. Like that, it's intentional. And look, and again, sounding like a crazy Christian again. We were just talking out in the break room about the idea that, like, we're actually in a battle in this life. There's a spiritual battle, and so I think we're being intruded upon all the time. Even algorithms that will lead you down rabbit holes and into potentially sin. It's a battle. This isn't easy. The odds are stacked, or the world's stacked against us. So.
Yeah, I think that's really important to know. I had this almost identical conversation with my sister recently because she thinks my niece has ADHD, and then she said that the psychologist she's seeing told her she probably has it, but she's learnt ways to cope with it. And I was like, no, you either have it or you don't, though. It's not like you don't learn, you're not going to get beat it. Like, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, like you said, it's present from childhood, and it's to do with the brain. So people can think they've got it because they identify, but it doesn't mean that they actually do.
Can I ask, does anyone know how you diagnose ADHD? Well, look, I mean, I guess,
It's
yeah.
neuropsych, isn't it?
So discussed other potential diagnoses, discussed, sort of history, have these things always been present, sort of discussing the things that were maybe indications that it wasn't ADHD and trying to actually work out, like, is there anything that indicates that this is not what's going on? Family history, because there's heritability, discussing, a whole history of stuff, talking to other people who aren't just the person, like they have to talk, my understanding is they have to actually talk to someone who is not the client, unless the client doesn't have anyone who has known them for their whole life who can come, but they really want to talk to a parent or a lifelong friend or someone who's seen this person over their lifetime from when they were a child and was aware when they were a child of their struggles and stuff to,
Sure, yeah. So look, I understand that it would have been comprehensive. I think there's probably 2 points. The first is if somebody comes in and tells me that they, are neurodiverse, like I'll never say like, oh, you're not neurodiverse. Like I would never do that. I guess what I find out is like, in what ways, what are you experiencing and how is it, limiting what you want to do and how is it affecting your life and talking about the big themes. I guess it's just that with the assessment process, I mean, I used to work for the Disability Services Commission and I'm doing diagnoses in intellectual disabilities and autism. It's really interesting how you can get 2 different assessors and they'll give a different result. And so I'm absolutely not invalidating, that there will be difficulties for people who have a particular cognitive or neurological profile. I guess just the important thing is, are the limitations being acknowledged, right? And there's accommodations and support. Is that or no?
Guys, can I change gears here?
Yeah.
We've been talking
I'm
about
trying too hard to convince you. But
you guys can take that offline because we've got other questions. In talking about, restart. We've got our youth group. We've got a girl who is transgender, and that was like, well, okay, how do we respond to this? And it was a shock to me to learn that there's a deep connection with transgenderism and autism. I was wondering if you guys could talk into that at all and just help us understand that a bit more.
The link between the two. I don't know loads about it, except for that there is a correlation. Someone did tell me a statistic around it, but I could not tell you off the top of my head in terms of the percentage crossover that there is. There are accommodations, though, when somebody is looking to kind of, I guess, access treatment for if they have gender dysphoria, in terms of exploring if there is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So there's some stuff in place around that, but again, I'm not full bottle on all that stuff. A training I went to many years ago, and I don't know if the trainers would say this now or not, but their theory around the correlation was that when you are a child that perhaps is having a lot of social difficulty and struggling to fit in, a concrete way of challenging that would be to change gender. So, like, I can't fit in as a boy, so therefore I'll fit in as a girl. That didn't necessarily go down super well in terms of the room of people that they were speaking to, but that was one theory, and those people specialised in working with autism. So they held a very open hand when they had children expressing things around that, basically, in their practice. But, yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to that idea of convention. I think, people who are neurodiverse, I think there's a strength often in seeing the world from a different angle. And then, from my experience, that can also, I guess, map onto a rebellion against convention when it comes to gender. In terms of, I guess that's what
Yeah, cool. And obviously I didn't say that to paint them all everyone in that same picture, but that is just, I found that interesting. Are there ways, do you think, is transgenderism and gender identity issues a thing on the rise that you guys have to deal with in your workspaces?
I have probably only a handful of people.
The place I work does, one of the, I guess, criteria around marginalisation is people that have a different gender identity. So I have worked with people that kind of have gone through that journey and are mostly at the other side, and they're receiving treatment for other mental health stuff. That I've actually not been allocated a lot of those clients in the time that I've been there. It just hasn't been who's ended up with me, which I think has been helpful in some ways. Was your question around have we worked with it? Or more so, I reckon what I see more is like around the gender non-binary or different pronouns. For me personally, I am not bothered if someone has a particular pronoun that they would like used for them. I think if they're telling you that that's how they want to be addressed, it doesn't particularly bother me, because I'm more trying to hear what they've got to say and work out how we're working together and what they actually want to work on. But I think it's a very different thing when someone's coming to you and saying, I want you to help me change this, because that becomes a very different area and not something I'd have any expertise in.
Just in my experience, there's often themes around what a person identifies a particular gender to be, and so so for one client had a lot of disdain for their mother, and so then identified as male, and you could see that it was a heavily linked kind of theme. But that's one. That's just sort of one reason why that can present. But I guess like Britt, when somebody comes in who's identifying as as non-binary or a gender that doesn't match their biological sex, for me the goal is not to win them over to align with their gender. I guess it's to understand the themes and to understand their distress. I probably do try, just personally, I try to stay pretty neutral with the pronouns, but in terms of name, I'll call people whatever name they would like to be called.
Yeah, it's a complex issue in, say, I find it hard in youth group. The youth are kind of on the front line of this, and they're dealing with it. And they're dealing with it before we, they have to deal with it, and then we have to become aware of it and then figure it out and think about it. So it's like a lag thing. And then you've got the science of it, which is shifting and changing. The conversation is evolving. And then you've got the theology of it, which is trying to interact with it, and it's not always consistent. So it is just a really complex issue for us to try and navigate as a church, and we don't always have. You guys are in your workplace, and it's a work thing, and
well, it's hard because even tonight, right? It's why I made all these qualifications. It feels like you're at the risk of speaking a blasphemy if you say something that doesn't align with the cultural narrative. So yeah, it is a minefield.
But I think also, so there is a gender clinic where I work. There's someone that works in that. And basically, like, we had a team meeting where people were saying that they did not want to be making those assessments. And there was like a strong, it was actually quite interesting to observe, because one of the great things about being a social worker is you're not being asked to make those assessments, so you can just kind of like sit back and listen to the conversation. But there was strong debate from psychiatry and clinical psychology, either for or against, and I don't think it's as solidly clear in each of those professions as people think. I think there's actually a lot of debate going on around right and wrong, and what constitutes a good assessment, and who should be allowed to say what they can say. And in fact, there's like some lawsuits that people were waiting on to find out how they would practice in future years. So yeah, I think it's a complex area for everyone, regardless of kind of faith background. People are trying to make sense. And it's always been there, but I guess it's kind of had more of a voice recently. Whether there's more percentage in the community, I think it's still fairly small. But perhaps young people in schools are probably seeing more of an expression of it than what any of us would have when we were in school, for sure.
Can I quickly make just one comment? I think there has been a bit of a rise in teenage girls, and some of that is actually related to anxiety, because just one component, testosterone is really good for reducing anxiety, and so that's like been like a really like a big thing in that kind of culture. But yeah, like there has been a bit of an epidemic in particularly in teenage girls.
Yeah, I think the reason I made that preface is I don't know if you guys are going to be able to answer this next question, because it is such a complex thing, and so but it might just be a thing that we actually all just need to really think about more, because it is going to become more and more prevalent. But the question is, what are some proactive steps that we can take as youth groups to make our youth groups more welcoming to youth struggling with gender identity issues? Because on the one hand, we want to be like as loving as we can, but are you aware of any things that we might just be blind to that like we could actually do to help?
I guess for me, I just see that, because we're made in God's image, I just literally, like, I feel like this is a genuine comment. Like, I just naturally want to treat every single person I meet with absolute value and dignity, and I don't really, I think Rory at Providence City answered it really well once when he was getting grilled. He said, like, our church, we don't consider, I think he was talking about sexuality, but I guess you could add gender to it. Like, we don't consider sexuality or gender identity to be like the pivotal thing in our identity, like our love of Christ is. And, I guess it's not, but just making sure that your goal is not to convert the person, to be, I guess, moral or to, do you know what I mean? Like conform, like the goal is that they get to know Jesus, and then maybe, people will come more into line with the way that God intends us to live. And like we all obviously have our things that, we need to come into line with. One of the big, I guess, parables for me around sexuality issues and gender identity issues and the church and following Jesus, I think about the pearl of great price, and it's that idea of, man, found a field, and pearl of great price. He wants the pearl, sells everything he has to get the field so he can get the pearl. And, I guess it's challenging for me, because it's kind of like, well, if we expect people to make like big calls on like things like sexuality and and to show a level of sacrifice and devotion to Jesus when they have these strong desires, man, we better be like addressing like the things that are a little bit more socially acceptable, or that we can hide a bit. better. And so I guess, I mean, that's just the way that I've thought through it, that we're all called to, we're all on this, it's a level playing field in that sense.
Yeah, I think that as youth groups, the joy of youth group is we're not, it's a part of the church, but it isn't church. Our goal is just to keep on loving the youth and preaching the gospel to them and allowing the Spirit to do his thing. And maybe, so if you're a youth leader here, that's what I'd say. But I would say if you're maybe as youth pastors, that's maybe something that we need to actually be thinking more deeply about and chatting together about. How can we better respond to this? Because, I mean, we've got it. I know other youth groups have it, and it's not going to, I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. Kate?
It's your body language, it's your tone that sends a different message. And it's really hard, and that's why all these details are so important, and it comes back down to, have you really looked into these topics? Do you know what it feels like experientially? And are you aware of yourself and how you come across and what you might need to change?
Yeah, creating an empathetic culture is huge. Thanks, Kate. That's great. Well, I reckon we might just call that Chris. But I think we'll just call it.
Why don't we give Greg and Britt and Hayden a round of applause? You can take a seat. Let me give you there's heaps of resources out there, but let me just give you some of them. There's the Center for Theology and Psychology. You can look that up on the website. The Christian Counselling and Educational Foundation, CCEF, they've got a number of booklets and stuff that are really helpful. Headspace as well is the secular kind of organisation, and so there's a bit of stuff in there. Obviously, you'll need to filter that through a Christian lens. And also Mental Health in Your Church. I guarantee that the first half of that book is great. I haven't finished it. Second half is great too. Cool, good. My trainee has finished it before me. Excellent. Those are just for chat to these guys if they've got some others. Do you want to throw some others out there? Happy with that? Okay, cool. Yep. That's all good. Okay, great. We're going to try and hold another refuel at the start of the year, term 1. Haven't got any of those details planned, but I'll let you know about that. If you came to this one, then you'll probably be able to hear about the next one as well. I want to tell you about this. So this is a mini kind of training event that I run. So if you are writing talks in your for your youth, and you want some training in how to do that, then I can come to your church and train you. So if you've got a team of people who are writing talks or doing Bible studies, because the skills are kind of transferable, then I can come to your church and run that training for you. I've kind of split it into kind of 4 units, if you like. I generally do which is normally 2 weeks, but you can pick and choose wherever your team is at and decide, which one of those you want help with that you think your team needs. yeah, I lasted at Gosnells. You can chat to Justin to find out if I was any good. But if you're interested in being trained how to give talks, then there's that. Okay, yeah, cool. And Dave as well. Yeah, that was a while back. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. If you want to keep in contact with us through the website, Facebook, or sign up to receive our emails as well. That does it for tonight, but I'm going to invite Hayden up to pray for us. And a big shout out as well to the guys live streaming. I didn't say that at the start, but yeah, there was a team down at Bustleton and a few others that couldn't make it, so they've been live streaming with us as well. Thanks, Hayden.
Cool. Let's pray. Lord God, we just thank you so much for the blessing that we have to have youth groups and have youth that come each week just to sit under your word and to know you more and love you more. And they get to do that around with other people their age and that they get to grow alongside each other. Thank you for the responsibility you've given us and the privilege to keep on passing on your gospel to the next generation. And we pray that you would help us to do that faithfully and lovingly and compassionately. Please give us empathy to be able to understand the complexity of teenagehood and all that's going on in it and how it's so different for so many of our youth. And in that, please, by your Spirit, give us wisdom and clarity in the way that we respond to them. And please, may you keep on helping us to have these discussions and be open and honest and about the difficulties that arise in this topic. And may we see great fruit of these Christians. As Britt said, this teenagehood is such a place where they're challenging everything. They want to know who they are, where they're going, and we can see that as a negative, as they might kind of walk away from the church. But it's also a great gospel opportunity, as their friends and that are doing the same. And may we point them to Jesus as the answer. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.